So this is both. I'm going to go through first know your rights with the police, which is relevant in part because it applies to everybody in a situation, but also like specifically this is like what you need to know if you're recording somebody and the police come up to you, or you're like at a protest and ICE is there and the police are there, or just generally I think it's good to know what everybody's rights are with the police sort of writ large. And this is mostly information from the ACLU. So this is sort of about protesters, which is not super relevant to the situation. You know, you have the right to free speech, but you don't necessarily have the right to incite people to violence. You are allowed to protest, but if you are engaging in civil disobedience, you can be arrested. If you endanger other people, you can be arrested, etc. So if you do encounter the police in Rhode Island and police stop you, the first thing you should do is ask whether you're detained or if you're free to go. And if you're free to go, you should leave. So in the situation, you should stay calm and in control. Keep your hands where they can be seen. Don't touch the police. Don't run. Police can stop and detain you only if they have reasonable suspicion that you've committed, are committing, or about to commit a crime or violation. So you can ask the police if they say you're being detained, why you're being detained, what they think you're doing. And you don't need to, like if the police ask you to go somewhere, you don't have to do that unless you're being arrested. Don't consent to a search and say that you do not, say, I do not consent to a search. You never have to consent to a search of anything, including your cell phone. And you can't be arrested simply because you refuse to consent to a search. If you consent to a search, that can affect your rights in court, because if you say, yeah, you can search me, and then you get searched and the police find something you didn't want them to find, then you don't have any legal standing to say, like, I didn't consent to that, or they found that illegally. If police threaten to get a warrant, then they can get one, but you don't have to consent, even if they're threatening to do that. If you're searched without a warrant, you shouldn't resist, but you can say again that you didn't consent. If you're told that police have a warrant, you should ask to see it. If you're asked to empty your pockets or your bag, don't do it. That consists of a search, or that constitutes a search, and so you don't have to do that unless there's a warrant. Police may pat you down without consent if they have reasonable suspicion that you're carrying a weapon. So if you like obviously have a knife in your pocket, police could pat you down to find that. But if like I was just standing here wearing what I'm wearing, I don't think that police would have reasonable suspicion to pat me down. If you are indeed arrested, so not just detained, then you can be searched, as can your immediate surroundings, but that doesn't mean any further search. So for example, if you drove somewhere and then you're walking around and you get arrested, police don't therefore have the right to search your car. They only have the right to search you and, like, you know, if you have a bag with you, for example. Throughout all of this and the whole process, you should exercise your right to remain silent by saying you would like to remain silent. It's not illegal here to refuse to identify yourself if you're detained and not arrested, but you can be detained until your identity is established, and you can be charged with a crime if you provide false information about your identity. So I would recommend just telling the police your name unless there's a really compelling reason why you don't want to do that. But it's often easier to just say what your name is so that you're not detained if you don't need to be. If you're not a U.S. citizen and you're being detained or arrested, you may be required to show immigration papers. However, if you're stopped by local law enforcement, if you do or don't have immigration papers, you have the right to remain silent. If you have papers with you and have been stopped by ICE, it's often easiest to show them. However, if you don't have them either with the police or with ICE, you can just remain silent. Nobody has to provide their social security number to law enforcement. You don't have to make any statements. You can just remain silent. If you're arrested, you should ask for a lawyer and say that you won't answer any questions without talking to a lawyer. You don't have to answer anything without a lawyer present. If you're arrested, you do have to provide your name and address, but you don't have to say anything else. You have the right to court-appointed counsel, so that is, even if you can't afford a lawyer, you should still say you'd like to speak to one because you'll be appointed one. Don't make any decisions, don't sign anything, etc. Then if you're arrested, you should contact a friend or family member, etc. But make sure not to tell any sensitive details over the phone, because often, like, if you're arrested and held, the phone conversations are recorded, and so don't say like, oh my god, yes, my friend, she lit a car on fire. This is her name and address. But you can just say like, I'm being held here. It's, you know, I think I'll get out at this time, like, if you know, anything else.
What did you mean by, you said don't sign anything? What possibly could they ask you to sign?
Confession?
Yeah, there's like a
release.
Well, that's possible, but I think, like, yeah, I think often it could be a confession. It could be also, like, often actually for people who are immigrants and are detained, even by the police, like, they're asked to sign things they don't understand that can impact, like, where they continue to be held or whether they continue to be held. I don't personally actually know the full range of things you might be asked to sign, but I think that's good reason, a good explanation of like why to ask for a lawyer, because they would know like sort of what different things you might be asked to sign and like whether you should or shouldn't sign them.
What if they ask you, you know, I can see cop shows, they tell you, they read you your rights, right? And what if they say, I've read your rights and sign this?
I wouldn't sign it.
No,
Still.
nothing.
I
Even
would
if you
not.
have right.
No. Also, they probably won't read you your rights, because police don't typically do that, even though they should. But no, I would not sign anything. Like, just say, I'm not going to sign anything without a lawyer. I don't want to say anything without a lawyer. Just because often people, just like too frequently people sign things without really understanding what they're signing, and it can lead to bad legal consequences.
Yeah, especially people with a document, they sign deportation, even though they don't know. Like, at the end, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, we have a lot of clients
Yeah,
who've
it's
been
like-
told in detention or when they've been arrested to just sign
Yeah.
something, and they do, and now they have it like order of deportation that they've signed. So generally avoiding signing things is good.
So is that related to provenance? But does that mean like the MTA announcements in New York City subways, for example, that kind of like authorized searches are not valid? Like you don't have to consent to them. Do you know?
I don't personally know. This new rights information is sort of widely applicable. The stuff that's specific to Rhode Island is specific to Rhode Island. I think in general, police like can't search you without reasonable cause. There's probably some law around like public transportation and belief that people might have weapons, and like some loophole that the MTA has worked through that is like why they can do that. And I think the law is slightly different in different places. But I personally don't think I have like any more knowledge to be able to fully answer that. It's a good question though.
I think in Boston, they can refuse to let you ride the T if you refuse to consent to the search. But I haven't seen that tested, so.
I think that's possible because it's like it's not just like you're walking down the street and you might get arrested. But I guess it gets a bit tricky with like services and public-private relationships and stuff like that. So if you do encounter the police, if you're with somebody else, have them like video what's going on. If you feel like you have the wherewithal to video what's going on, that's great. But be really clear that you're reaching for your phone and explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. Again, if you obviously like, there's a lot of risks in trying to record the police or like move around when you're interacting with the police. So this is something to do at your own comfort. You can ask for officers' names, badge numbers, and business cards. If this is happening to you and you have the capacity to write them down, do so. Or if this is happening to somebody else, write down that information. You have the right to request a receipt if any property is taken. If you're injured, you should take photos of the injuries. And the best thing to do is often to take a picture of the injury, like with something that's like a comparison for size, or like with, like, just to be clear, like where on your body it is and like what you're comparing it to, etc. And then write down everything you can after the encounter, like as quickly as you can. So that's sort of a like summary of if you encounter police. Hopefully, particularly in like recording ICE, you will not encounter the police, but this is relevant if you're at a protest, if you're walking on the street, etc.